actually think they're more cultural than they are technical. That you need to be able to explain that data journalism is simply a new term for an existing way of doing journalism. It's thinking of data as a source, complementing humans as sources. So it's showing your editors and maybe demonstrating to your readers, people formerly known as the audience, the ones who are helping you to understand what they're interested in, that this is another way of doing journalism that gets beyond just anecdotes to trying to gather the evidence. Why would you cover a story without looking for the data which gives you the larger context for the thing you're covering? That lets you know the history of something or the trends for something. Instead of talking to 3 people, you could see what 3,000 people had done, 30,000 people had done, what people have done over time in a given area. Data gives you a much better insight once you've cleaned it and collected it and organized it and validated it, just as you would human sources, to be able to tell a better story. So it does take some time to do that well, but if you do, then you get to better journalism. And it's not divorced from what has come before. Investigative journalists have been looking for good data on the things they cover for decades. Today we simply have better tools. We have better tools to find it, better tools to clean it, better tools to host it and publish it, and to visualize it, and to give everyone else who's interested in it insight into how you did those things, and to use it themselves. The first thing is always your brain, right? You need to be a skeptic. You need to think about what it is that you're trying to do. What's the story? Not to go back in a given direction, right? And to try to make a story out of nothing, but to look at something and to think about what's the story here? What am I trying to learn about? What's my hypothesis about why something is happening? And then what data do I need to prove that? So that's your first challenge, finding data. The good news is there's more data than ever before, right? So you can talk to other journalists and other editors about where to find and search for data. Search engines are a great option. Catalogs are a great option. Freedom of information requests for data are an option. And you can learn how to file those as well for your given country. The next step is something to clean and organize data. And this is where you get into your first key tool, a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets aren't scary. They're just a way of organizing things in rows and columns, nothing more. Some are simple, some are complex. Some have really powerful tools behind the scenes, but it's just a table of things. And that's a way of organizing data. Remember, each data point, a datum, right, is something that's laid out in that grid. Over time, your spreadsheet, your database, once you graduate to your next level of tool, will grow. It may be much larger. You may have thousands or millions of rows of data and 25, 30 different columns, but it's still just a basic grid, a spreadsheet. That's your tool. And the next is a text editor. If you've ever been a writer of any kind, you know you need to have a text editor. Some of them, however, are better for working with data. People will talk to you about using Markdown, which is a way of working with certain kinds of documents. You could do that, but maybe something really simple like BBEdit might be the thing. If you're an online journalist, you already know about something like that because you use it for HTML editing. And then the next step, once you graduate beyond, will be things that help you work with code. But that's another conversation. You just need to learn how to find data and then use a spreadsheet to organize it, and then to learn how to use the spreadsheet to look for trends within that data, and then graduate to maybe simple tools to publish it and visualize it. And you can find lots of those too. So there are many places where you can see the impact of data-driven journalism upon the world, upon institutions and government, upon corporations. And there are lots of great awards where you can go and see these things. Data has played an essential role in Pulitzer Prize winning investigations. There's now a whole category in Online News Association, Irene Nikar Awards, in the space you see in the Data Journalism Awards. So you can find many different kinds of stories. For me, the one that has had an impact upon my thinking about what's possible is something that NPR did. That's National Public Radio, shifted to being NPR. And the reason they've described themselves as NPR now is because they don't just do radio. They do digital journalism. They do it very well. And they had an investigator who was writing about this issue of accessible playgrounds. That's a playground where a child with accessibility issues, someone who might be disabled in some way, can play. An issue that may be not as of great interest to some people, but for parents of these children or their relatives is incredibly important. So he was writing about it, this journalist, and he came to the technical team and said, how can I use technology to tell this story? And it evolved into something else, where the list of playgrounds he put together that were accessible became the beginnings of a data commons. It became something that they shared with the world, and they didn't just stop with publishing that data and creating a story next to it and creating an application on top of it where you could ask for a nearby playground. It became a relationship with their audience, the people formerly known as the audience because they're active publishers and creators themselves, and they asked them to go to the playgrounds nearby and to tell them whether they are accessible and then to add that as a data point. So a story that could have just been a narrative about which playgrounds were accessible became something else. It became a commons of data that they shared with the world and with an application on top of it that people could contribute data to that would enable people who really wanted to know something about the world to use it. It's that kind of work that can create some of the most important acts of journalism in many other contexts, around the environment, around health, around education. You can imagine how someone would find a school, would find out where they can volunteer, would find out where their local hospital is, and could contribute data about how long it took to get service, what kinds of tests were there, any other sort of thing. And then have it be not just a narrative with the data that gets buried, but have the data be contributed to a commons where everyone else can see it and use it. Those kinds of projects are the ones that will have an impact not just upon how we see the world, but how we're able to move through it. And that's where data journalism is changing our world.